Okay, we've just had a shock move which has left leaders in panic mode today. And it doesn't matter whether you live in a developed nation or an undeveloped nation, rich nation, poor nation. This is going to affect everybody. So what am I talking about here? Yesterday at the BRICS summit, Putin made a declaration which I think has taken a lot of people by surprise. It certainly took me by surprise. So what were we expecting? What was the forecast around this? Well, we expected about 5 countries, maybe 6. I mean, I would have said at the most 7 or 8 countries would be added to the BRICS alliance. That didn't happen. It was actually 13 countries that were added. 13 countries. 9 of them are official partners. 4 of them, which are your Southeast Asian powerhouses, as it were, they are unofficial partners, but they'll be trading within the bloc. So let me give you a breakdown of these countries then. I've even gone as far as to calculate their GDP for you. And then I'll explain why this is alarming for the West. Very alarming. And we'll get into that in a moment. We'll give you a short history lesson on what this means. So firstly, the 9 official members then. In fact, let me stand here so you can see the ocean in the background here. From smallest to largest then, Bolivia with a GDP of 43 billion a year, Uganda 45 billion, Belarus 75 billion, Uzbekistan 80 billion, Cuba 110 billion, Kazakhstan 220 billion, Algeria 265 billion, Nigeria 475 billion, and Turkey, which is the wild card here, with a $1 trillion GDP. Turkey, there's a lot going on at the moment with Turkey, and it's probably outside the scope of this video, but they did do some bombing raids just over the last couple of days here. I think it was more Kurd areas of northern Iraq and also Syria. It's that triangle region up there. But not to take away too much from what I want to explain here, the 4 powerhouses of Southeast Asia then, Malaysia with a GDP of 405 billion, Vietnam 410 billion, Thailand 550 billion, and Indonesia 1.3 trillion GDP for Indonesia. So this adds to the original 5 then. We have Brazil 1.9 trillion GDP, Russia 2.2 trillion, India with 3.4 trillion, China, the powerhouse, $18 trillion GDP, South Africa 405 billion. So these are your original 5 or original 4 plus South Africa who joined afterwards. Now the reason I wasn't expecting so many was because if you think what happened early 2024, the new members were the United Arab Emirates, UAE, 510 billion GDP, Saudi Arabia 1.1 trillion. They are in yet out. They're sort of still considering the BRICS membership because obviously there's a lot of issues there. Who created Saudi Arabia? The Saudi family. It was the United States, and Saudi really controls the oil / petrodollar aspect of this. So it's a big gamble for the Crown Prince. Will he do it? MBS, the Crown Prince, will he do it? I think he possibly will, especially with his poor relationship with Joe Biden, where he wasn't very happy to host Biden, yet he rolled out the red carpet for Trump. So we're going to have to see. I think he's probably waiting on who the next president will be in less than 2 weeks' time now. Wow, we're so close to this election. It's going to be absolutely explosive. And then the last ones that were added this year then to wrap this part up was Egypt 475 billion, Iran 390 billion. You know why Iran is key from the military sort of geopolitical videos we've done recently. Ethiopia 125 billion. Now, despite what a lot of economists keep talking about with Argentina, they in fact didn't join the BRICS alliance, even though they were granted permission. Milei decided to instead focus on a US partnership. I think only time will tell if that was the right decision or not. I think it was probably the right decision from their currency point of view, the pesos, but is it a long-term good strategy? I would say no, and you'll see why as we go through this video. So all in all then, these new member, if you add everyone up, which I did, I've added this all up for you, I calculated it is now over 30 trillion US dollars, or 30% of the entire global output. 30% of global GDP now is among the BRICS nations. But it doesn't end there. BRICS announced that more than 30 other countries have put in applications or shown signs of interest to join BRICS, but they said that it isn't right to add too many this year. No, they added what, 13 just now, plus those other 5-ish that they added the start of the year. We're still waiting on one decision there. I mean, that's 18 countries potentially in one single year. What do you think is going to happen next year? And we know where all of this is stemming from. It's obvious. It is from the Western sanctions on Russia, because Russia is really the spearhead, as it were, of BRICS. Or should we say Putin is the spearhead of BRICS. Now, I said I wanted to give you a historical perspective here so that you can have something to relate to. And I would say that's the Cold War era of the 1940s to the 1990s, where we had the two axes of power. We had the then Soviet Union, obviously doesn't exist today, I guess we could say loosely, but it doesn't exist today. And the other axis of power was the United States / their NATO allies. So this was a very long period, if you think about it, late 1940s to the 90s, about 50 years, 5 decades of very stern geopolitical tensions. And I think we can parallel that to what we are seeing today with the BRICS nations and again the US-led alliance of Western powers. That is the best comparison we can use today. It is history repeating all over again. Now, one particularly interesting and prominent episode of this period, which some of you may remember, some of you may not, was the Suez incident, crisis as it were, Suez Canal of 1956. And this is when the Egyptian president actually nationalized the Suez Canal. Now, his name was Gamal Abdel Nasser. Yes, a bit of a long name there. And really, he resisted, with Soviet backing loosely, but he resisted the takeover attempt by Britain and France to actually reclaim the canal. And I would say this was the real turning point in that era, where we saw the weakening of European powers, predominantly led by Britain and France in that period, where we saw that weakening and we saw the strengthening of the alternative powers, is probably the best way to describe them. But the other thing that it really highlighted was the rise of something that we're not seeing today, I would say. In fact, no, I would certainly say we're not seeing today. And that is that during that period, we saw countries that were somewhat independent were having influence put upon them to join a side, either the US-led side or the Soviet-led side. And we saw this very large movement of countries that just said, no, we're not going to take a side, we are going to stay independent. Now, that's very different to today, because we're not really seeing that. We're seeing a couple of countries doing that, but predominantly most countries are taking a side this time around. That's what makes this even more dangerous. So why is this particularly sort of paralleled, interesting for today? Well, the BRICS alliance is seen as the sort of Robin Hood, as it were. It's the white knight in the world. So they are sort of showing the US and the Western powers as the Sheriff of Nottingham, as it were. You know, he has control, he has all the gold, he has all the money. Well, the gold's an interesting one because the Western powers don't have all the gold now. It's very quickly being transferred over to the BRICS countries very heavily. We did a video on that, of course. So why is this relevant today then? Well, a lot of these countries who have been somewhat left behind are seeing BRICS as their saving grace. That is what they are now seeing. And just look at what happened with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has been ongoing for several years now. If you didn't toe the line with the West and impose sanctions, you were somewhat ostracized quite heavily. You look at certain countries, Belarus, or you look at Hungary, and you see the challenges they've had. So I think what we're seeing is a response by countries who are dissatisfied with the West having control of the world. And why is this different to what's happened in the past? Well, because in the past, remember, we had these countries that wanted to stay somewhat independent and they didn't want to take a side. This time around, that's not happening, and that's why it's a lot more dangerous, because there are two sides now. You have the Western side, NATO with the EU, and then you have the other side, which I would say is BRICS. A lot of people don't like to say that. They don't like to say BRICS because they say it's just an economic alliance, it's just for trade. Yes, that's how they position it. That's how they say it's just for trade. But you really think that if there's conflict, that they're not going to support each other? Come on. Of course they are. So what do we have then? Well, we have these 5 events that are going on right now. Let me summarize these. Number 1, it's a shift in global power dynamics. This is going on fast. It's happening right now. And it's an anti-West bloc. And there isn't really a way to stop, well, there is one way to stop it, which I really hope doesn't occur, which would be war. It would be a huge war. You've already seen some people saying, some politicians, US politicians in particular, saying that we should strike now, before the sort of BRICS alliance, or what they call the axis of evil, they're calling it. They're saying before this gets too much power militarily and economically. So that is one aspect which could slow it down. I really hope we don't see it, but long term, it won't make any difference. The pendulum always swings. So number 2 then is this energy security threat. This is huge. It really is huge. This is enormous, because the way things are going, BRICS are going to control most of the energy in a very short space of time, probably in the next few years. That is risky for the West, and I think that's probably behind a little bit of this green energy transition that they are, you know, constantly talking about, even though none of those leaders actually follow any of their own rules that they impose on their citizens. But there you go. The third point of the crisis then is economic isolation. And we've already seen trade wars going on. They've been going on for years now. They were heavy under the Trump era as well. The EU is imposing all sorts of very heavy tariffs on EVs, electric vehicles right now. So the trade wars is a big risk as well. Point number 4 would be technology, and I guess we can say military technology in some regards. Because what are we seeing? The rise and dominance of China. China owns most of the factories. They own a lot of the technology, and then they will bypass us very quickly. And then the obvious one, I think, is number 5, and this is your geopolitical conflict. This is the axes. You have we have NATO and the US, let's say, predominantly. But you look on the other side, you have your Russia and a confirmed military alliance with North Korea, where if one is attacked, that the other will come to its defense, possibly even providing troops for any conflict. But you also have the other loose alliances. So you also have China and you have Iran, plus a lot of others. Although there's nothing official in writing in terms of a defense pact, you know there is one. There's definitely one there. Do you really think that if China's biggest ally, Russia, was about to get wiped off the map somehow, that they wouldn't intervene. No, because that would weaken them. You see, the power is in alliances, especially militarily and economically. So overall then, there's a lot of problems on the way, my friends. I hope you're subscribed here to the channel. Please like the video if you get the chance. And apart from that, I will see you next week now. Take care. God bless you and your family. And I'll see you on the next video.